So I'm going to shoot this thing over to the prototype atheist, and he's going to tell you exactly what a logical fallacy is. We'll discuss that a little bit, and then we're going to go into some specific, frequently used fallacies in probably our experience with Christians, because this is primarily a Christian nation dominated by around 73% Christians. But that doesn't mean that any other religion cannot make these claims, or any person cannot make these claims in an argument. It doesn't have to do primarily with religion. It can be in any debate or any argument. You can encounter these logical fallacies, and we kind of want to address these and put an end to them. So, Brendan?
All right, yeah, thanks. We wanted to do an episode regarding logical fallacies, basically because being atheist, you commonly will enter into debate with people, and you want to make sure that your arguments are logical and rational, and that they make sense and that they're valid. And also when you're receiving arguments from people on the other side of a topic, you want to make sure that they're presenting valid arguments as well. And if not, you can point out the flaws in their arguments to determine if what they're telling you is valid or not. Because obviously when you go into a debate, you have two sides, and each side feels pretty strongly and they feel like they can defend their position. But at the same time, you should always be willing to learn something new, or make sure that what you believe or what you think is true is solid and valid, and that you can justify it. So it's important to know that, so that you don't make these mistakes, and also that you can recognize them when other people make them and point them out. And you should remember too that importantly, just because someone makes a logical fallacy, that doesn't immediately render their entire argument untrue or illogical. For example, if somebody personally insults you, that doesn't mean that their entire argument is false. It just means that their way of arguing that their argument is true by insulting you is invalid, and it's not logical. So that's an important thing to note. So you don't want to just completely dismiss somebody just because they've made a fallacious argument. But you can definitely point that out to them, and then ask them if they have something more legitimate that they can offer to you to present their case. So pretty much tonight we're just going to go over a few of the most common fallacies that you'll run into, specifically, and this can be in any kind of debate, but specifically related to things like atheism or philosophical naturalism. So things that you'll commonly hear and that will commonly come up, so you can address them and know how to recognize them.
Anyway, I'm going to shoot it back over to the prototype atheist, and he's going to discuss straw mans for you guys.
Yeah, thanks. Way to go there, breaking Godwin's law on the first segment. But we wouldn't have it any other way, of course. Yeah, that's certainly one of the more frequent examples you hear there, and they also use it a lot of the time, because you'll bring up the fact like, oh, hey, well, the overwhelming majority of prisoners in the United States are Christians, and they fully admit that, and they'll say like, oh, they're not true Christians, or they wouldn't be there, or they became Christians after they were in jail because they found Jesus there or whatever. Or another thing they like to do is they like to tell people that who used to be Christians who are now atheists, like myself. They like to say like, oh, you were never a true Christian. If you were a true Christian, you wouldn't have become an atheist. You would have been filled with the Holy Spirit or something like that. So they try to lob it at you like that, as like it actually is an actual argument. But yeah, personally, I think what might be my quote-unquote favorite fallacy to deal with is the straw man argument. And basically what this is when somebody misrepresents another person's position, they're basically creating a straw man. So it's basically, they're creating something that doesn't actually exist, and then it's something easy to knock over and destroy, and then say that like, oh, I won the argument because I defeated your position, even though it was a falsely created position. So an example of this would be like when theists say that atheists they really believe in God. Like the movie God's Not Dead. They say basically the whole premise of that movie is that the main character is just angry with God because his mother died when he was younger, and so he becomes an atheist, but he really does believe in God secretly, and then he just, eventually, of course, by the end of the movie, he comes back to believing in God again. But that's a straw man of his actual position. And another way they also try to present this as far as the atheist position is saying that atheists claim that no God exists, which isn't true in the case of the vast majority of atheists. Most atheists are what we would consider agnostic atheists, which means that they don't have knowledge if a God exists or not, but they simply believe that one does not. They might go further and say that they know that specific gods don't exist, including maybe like the Abrahamic deity, the Christian God, for example, because the preponderance of the evidence actually pretty much makes that the case. But we don't say that there's no possibility that any God exists, and that's what they'll say, like, oh, you're an atheist, you think that no gods exist at all. But unless you're a Gnostic atheist, which is rarely the case, that's not the argument. So they basically try to present this false version of your position in order to knock it down, because then they'll say things like, oh, well, it takes just as much faith to believe that no God exists as it does for me to believe that a God exists. And then they'll pretty much try to attempt to level the playing field using that argument. So that's also kind of an example of the tu quoque fallacy, which is basically Latin for you too. And pretty much what that is they try to avoid criticism of their own position by criticizing you similarly. So, for example, if they say, oh, well, it takes just as much faith for you to believe in that there is no God, or something like, oh, it takes just as much faith for you to believe in evolution as it is for me to believe in God of creationism. That's an example of that fallacy, because you're telling them, oh, well, you rely on faith for your beliefs, and then they're just like, well, you rely on faith too. So basically, it's kind of like I'm rubber, you're glue. Like, oh, well, you do the same thing. It's you too. So we're equal here, and that's how they try to address the argument. But that's another fallacy. So I think that pretty much covers the straw man argument, and then I threw in another related one there too.